what you hearing. It's what you hearing. Listen. It's what you hearing. Listen. It's what you hearing. Listen.
Ladies and gentlemen.
X gon' give it to you. Fuck, wait for you to get it on your own. X gon' deliver to you. Knock, knock, open up the door and spread. With the non-stop pop out and stainless.
Mr. Cropper here. I'm going to be objecting to the atheist experience with Matt Dillahunty and his objecting to objectivism. He's going to display his Kantian nature, I'm afraid. Now, I watched this years ago. We'll notice the published date was October 2008. So it's now an 11-year-old video. I did watch this years ago. I don't know if I made it all the way through it, because it is just garbage. But let's go from here. He's just done his introduction and stuff, so we're starting at 58.
So I'll give the really simple explanation of what objectivism is. From the Wikipedia article, Ayn Rand's philosophy is based on 3 axioms: the axiom of existence, the law of identity, and the axiom of consciousness.
So far he's okay, isn't he? But he's doing this off of Wiki because he doesn't have access to Ayn Rand's books. That's a shame that an atheist wouldn't have Ayn Rand's books around.
The axiom of existence is, existence exists. The law of identity is, A is A.
Now, don't restate that, please, as A equals A. Alright? A thing is not equal to itself. You're not equal to yourself. You are yourself. That is the law of identity. It's not equal. How do you equal yourself? That is stupid. That's a mathematical concept. You are yourself. That is the law of identity. You are yourself. A is A. Please do not restate it.
That is, objects are always equal to themselves.
No, no, no. Objects are not equal to themselves. They are themselves. There is something that is what it is. It's not equal to what it is. That would be stupid. It is what it is.
And the axiom of consciousness is, consciousness exists.
Well, sort of. It's you are conscious. So that means that consciousness exists. But consciousness is not floating and independent from people that are conscious. So really the axiom is you are conscious.
These are all things, I mean, they're axioms, okay? I would consider them pretty much no-duh assertions.
Bingo! These are no-duh assertions?
They're axioms, okay? I would consider them pretty much no-duh assertions.
All right. Well, that's a big duh right there. This is Russell Glasser then, huh? I thought this is Matt Dillahunty. Maybe he's the other guy. That is a duh thing to say.
Okay, I would consider them pretty much no-duh assertions.
No duh wouldn't be an assertion, would it? Right? Gravity pulls things down. Is that an assertion? So he does not know the difference between a fact and an opinion. For him, everything is an opinion. Everything is an opinion.
I mean, I wouldn't yet consider them the foundation of some very insightful philosophy. I think.
Now, there we go. What does he mean by insightful? What would an insightful philosophy use as its base? Not the fact that you exist and have a mind, but something else, right? Something maybe hoity-toity or floating, maybe starting with some sort of first principles like non-contradiction or something stupid like that, right? So Ayn Rand has maybe cobbled together a philosophy, but it's not an insightful philosophy. She's not got any insight into anything. You know, ladies and gentlemen, this is part of the problem with people that are coming to objectivism from philosophy as such, and they come to objectivism as another philosophy to look at. Objectivism discards almost all philosophy. Just discards it. We don't take it into account. We don't ruminate on it. We just toss it in the bin. And that's what they don't get about it. They think that all of philosophy stands and objectivism is trying to join the conversation. No, we're throwing you bastards out and taking over. Now, this guy doesn't get that project. He doesn't understand that at all. He thinks that a philosophy starts with some bizarre, floating, hoity-toity, esoteric assertions, and then you build from there in some bizarre, difficult-to-understand way. Objectivism is the philosophy of real life living in this world as you are. And not as you are in a, the way you've created yourself, but as in a metaphysical, as you are, as your nature is. And you can act within your nature to create your own soul, unlike Sam Harris. So this guy doesn't understand the enterprise of philosophy, period. He doesn't understand what objectivism is trying to do, and he dismisses objectivism because it doesn't do what the other philosophies seem to do. Objectivism starts with no duh obvious things, not assertions. See, he doesn't even understand that much. These are no duh obvious facts. How are they assertions? Because he doesn't believe anything else exists besides assertions, right? That's Immanuel Kant's philosophy, is you can only make assertions. You can never prove, you can never have actual knowledge, you can only make assertions. So, and even an axiom is an assertion to his Kantian melted brain.
I think you can make a case, and Ayn Rand was an atheist, and I think you can make a case that some of where she's going with this is to sort of separate her views about objectivity and the real physical world from supernaturalism.
So she just chose those axioms. She's just motivated in choosing those axioms to try to separate herself from religion, then, huh? See, his whole worldview is based around atheism, isn't it? Now, atheism is just a mundane fact for objectivists. It's just a mundane fact that nobody has brought to our attention any evidence, nor could any evidence conceivably be brought that there is such a thing as a God, however you define it. And so it's just a side fact. It's just over there. It's just a fact for objectivists. You don't base your philosophy around it. It's not the all-important thing. But for him it is, and everything gets measured by that, including why Ayn Rand chose the axioms, so she could separate herself from religious moralists and point to an objective morality. So she was not motivated by morality or rationality or truth or objectivity. She was motivated by a dislike of religion. That is stupid.
And I think this is the part where you and I would heartily agree with anything that Ayn Rand might have to say. But from there, she's going to take it on to a bunch more assertions, which
a bunch more, as though she's made any assertions at all. So she's just deep in the assertions right now in his mind. So you see why, when they come from the camp of philosophy as such into objectivism, they are just not prepared to deal with it. He just looks at her axioms, calls them assertions, and then goes forward from there and says she's got all kinds of other assertions too. How bizarre that those axioms are assertions to him.
Going to get to. This is from the Objectivist newsletter in 1962. They're sort of the basic principles of objectivism. Number one, reality exists as an objective absolute. Facts are facts, independent of man's feelings, wishes, hopes, or fears. Pretty.
Yeah, I think for the most part, I'm on par. I'm on board with that one.
There's me.
Number two, reason, the faculty which identifies and integrates the material provided by man's senses, is man's only means of perceiving reality, his only source of knowledge, his only guide to action, and his basic means of survival. Again, I can't really complain yet. Okay,
a D-type would complain and say, no, I don't have to use my mind to survive. I can go get on welfare or food stamps or join a society or be part of a commune or something like that. And then objectivists are going to say you're relying on somebody else to use their mind to survive. And the D-type's going to say, no, nobody seems to be using their mind. We're all just relying on each other.
Number three, Every man is an end in himself, not the means to the ends of others. He must exist for his own sake, neither sacrificing himself to others, nor sacrificing others to himself. The pursuit of his own rational self-interest and of his own happiness is the highest moral purpose of his life. Okay, here's where I start to get shaky.
Yeah.
And it's not so...
Which part of that would you take exception to? Which part?
And it's not so much that I'm necessarily complaining about what she's chosen as her values. I mean, I do have some misgivings about it, but it's not so much that I have a problem with in number 3. It's the way that she presents it as basically a basic, obvious fact, a truism. Sacrificing himself to others, nor sacrificing others to himself. The pursuit of his own rational self-interest and of his own happiness is the highest moral purpose of his life.
The pursuit of his own rational self-interest is his highest moral purpose in life. Pursuit of his happiness is his highest moral purpose in life. All right. Now that is not perfectly obvious. That is not an axiom. Now it's perfectly well ironed out and argued for. Aristotle in the Nicomachean Ethics did a very good job of setting down happiness as the goal of all human action, and nobody's been able to question that since. It's very well set down and argued for, but no, it's not an axiom that argues for itself. Now, he's upset that it's not an axiom that argues for itself.
His own happiness is the highest moral purpose of his life. Okay, here's where I start to get shaky.
Yeah.
Because he wants this to be an axiom that argues for itself. He can disintegrate this by coming up with a monk who doesn't choose happiness but still lives their life, right?
And it's not so much that I'm necessarily complaining about what she's chosen as her values. I mean, I do have some misgivings about it, but it's not so much that I have a problem with in number 3. It's the way that she presents it as basically a basic, obvious fact, a truism.
Now he's just reading a list of from the Objectivist newsletter or something where they're listing facts of objectivism. So it's not true that Ayn Rand presents that as a basic, obvious truism. That is just not true. He's reading it, trying to take it as an axiom. That's his problem.
A couple of months ago, for the last couple of months, I've been having an exchange with Chuck Colson, that you might know. If you check the blog under the Chuck Colson tag, you'll see that we're now up to 3 total posts that have been written by Chuck Colson in response to me, and I'm trying to come up with a comprehensive response to him. But one of the things that I hit him on in reviewing his recent book was that he seems to have, well, first of all, he, very much like Ayn Rand, talks a lot about objective reality. He thinks that the problem in the world is all these postmodernists who go and say there's no such thing as truth, everything is subjective, yada, yada, yada. And I mentioned in my response to him that this is a point where he and I really agree, up to a point. The problem is, he takes this statement that there is objective reality, and then he just runs wild with it by talking about the Bible and stuff, and talking about how obviously it's true that Christian values are the best values. That's not obvious at all, because while I think that there is objective reality in the world, there's also stuff that happens inside your head, and most of the things that you value are in there.
So, your head is not part of objective reality, then? That's the assertion that he makes there, isn't it? He does divorce the mind from the body. This guy buys into the mind-body dichotomy. The things that happen inside your brain are disconnected from reality for him, philosophically. Now, actually, everything that happens in your brain is related to reality, but not in his Kantian view of the world.
Not only is it not obviously true, or not only not obvious, I don't think it's true.
Well, yeah.
And I think that we could debate many of the fundamental moral and ethical tenets of Christianity, and have countless times on the show. To the kind of flat assertion that it's so obvious that Christianity is the one true moral guiding path. I mean, it's just wrong.
Now, if you take the axioms that Ayn Rand gave to be assertions, then you're never, ever, ever going to be able to get rid of the Christians. You're going to have to take Ayn Rand's axioms seriously. They're not Ayn Rand's axioms, they're simply the axioms of reality. And you're going to have to take them seriously. You cannot dismiss them as assertions, or you're always going to be taking the Christians on board. Your philosophy's always going to have a little entrance hatch for Christianity and for Islam and for anybody else that wants to come up with any kooky thing, collectivists, Nazis, you name it. They are going to get on your boat as long as you don't use those axioms, as long as you don't accept the axioms, that you exist and that you have a mind. As long as you treat those things as assertions, oh, we can just, we don't need to worry about those. Those are just Ayn Rand's assertions. As long as you treat those as assertions, you're never, never going to get rid of these subjectivists jumping on your boat.
On all counts. And we don't even need to spend any time going into, slavery, right? Infinite punishment for finite crimes.
How are you going to get rid of slavery or infinite punishment for finite crimes if you don't have a mind and you don't exist?
The idea that one person be held responsible for somebody else's crimes, and just start to finish, right?
None of these matter if you don't have a mind and you don't exist.
Write down the doctrine, and not to sidetrack everything.
Sure.
If you go to ironchariots.org, the counter-apologetics wiki that I started, that Russell did a lot of work on as well, and there are other people who are working on it now. I'm not, but I did a deconstruction of the Sermon on the Mount. This is a passage that Christians generally think or view as the greatest thing anybody has ever said. And I'll freely admit that there are some good things within the Sermon on the Mount, far fewer than most Christians would claim. And I did a verse-by-verse look at this to say, is this really the greatest thing anybody ever said? Some of this is common sense, some of it's just wrong, some of it's bad advice. And if this is...
Now, some of you, ladies and gentlemen, will have seen my comparison of the Old Testament and the New Testament just from some ethical injunctions that David Pacman put in one of his videos. He just compared the Old Testament and the New Testament, saying that communism and socialism are not new. They're very old values in human society. But I took that little piece of his video and just compared the Old Testament, which is common sense ethical injunctions, to the New Testament, which are wicked, anti-ethical beliefs, that you should destroy yourself and your life, and that's ethical, compared to you should respect others and do justice and stuff like that. The Old Testament's pretty nonsense, or pretty sensible, non-questionable, common sense is what I was trying to say. The Old Testament is kind of common sense justice. The New Testament is evil, wicked injunctions to destruction. Huge difference.
This is the kind of information that you get from your God incarnate. I'm unimpressed. But back to objective.
Okay, well, getting back to Ayn Rand, I just want to point out that this is a place where I have some misgivings that Ayn Rand might start to veer off into Chuck Colson territory. Because to say that every man is an end to himself, and he must do this and he must not do that, seems to be wandering into the territory of mixing up.
Where did she say he must do this or must not do that? Let's remember that thing that he got upset about, number 3, was that it said the highest moral purposes of man's life is his happiness. Right? Where does it say man must do this and must do that?
Values and the objective reality, which she just spent the last 2 points talking about.
Yeah, and there's a huge flaw in that third one, or a couple of huge flaws, I'd say, in that third one. One is, as you pointed out, this must do, that kind of almost dogmatic assertion. The second.
All right, we're at 7:52. Must do. Is that what she said in it?
Assertions, which I'm going to get to. This is from the objectivist, sort of separate her views about objectivity and the real physical world from supernaturalism. And I think this is the part where you and I would heartily agree with anything. The axiom of consciousness, no duh assertions. I mean, I wouldn't yet consider them the foundation of some very insightful philosophy. I think you can make a case, and Ayn Rand was an atheist, because to say that every man is an end to himself, and he must do this and he must not do that, seems to be wandering into the territory of mixing up values and the objective reality, which she just spent the last 2 points talking about.
Yeah, and there's a huge flaw in that third one.
So we can't mix up values with objective reality. Values are separate from objective reality, is his view of it, really. I mean, his view on it's not clear, admittedly. He doesn't even understand his own views on it. But as he's trying to grasp these things, he does want to separate values from objective reality.
Or a couple of huge flaws, I'd say, in that third one. One is, as you pointed out, this must do, that kind of...
Yeah, there's no must do. It's the highest moral purpose of his life is happiness. And in order to achieve happiness, he has to act within his nature as a rational animal. There's no must do. I mean, it's pointing out, if you want to achieve happiness, then you should act in accordance with your nature as a rational animal. There's no ordering anybody to do anything.
Almost dogmatic assertion. The second one is...
Again with the assertions. Now, I'm not saying that this is that happiness is the purpose of life is an axiom that you can't get around, but it may as well be. It's that solidly argued for, and nobody's been able to do a ding in the armor of that argument since Aristotle put it down 2,300 years ago. Everything you do is for happiness properly defined. It's not an assertion in that sense. It's really well defined, but they can only view these things as assertions because they're Kantian.
Kind of almost dogmatic assertion. The second one is that
if it's a dogmatic assertion that you have to use rationality to live as a human being, wow, what would be an objective view of the case?
Shouldn't sacrifice himself for others or others for himself, and the justification of this is the pursuit of his own rational self-interest. And yet, rational self-interest is not clearly defined within this context.
See, he wants us to define rational self-interest in a floating Platonic way that's not related to any given individual. Otherwise, it will be subjective, right? Now, you and I, as objectivists, are going to have to plug the individual into the reality somewhere in order to talk about the question. We're going to have to say, what is the question? We're going to have to put the individual in reality to find out the question. But he wants us to set down these answers without reference to reality.
That he shouldn't sacrifice himself for others or others for himself, and the justification of this is the pursuit of his own rational self-interest. And yet, rational self-interest is not clearly defined within this context. I mean,
right. Each individual is going to have to define it for themselves. Every individual is going to have to define it for themselves. So, and they had better do the best job they can because their own happiness is at stake, right? So, morality, Ayn Rand's morality is not a list of orders or injunctions or what was he saying earlier? They're ordering people to do this. I can't remember the word he used. And her morality is not that. Her morality says you've got to think for yourself. Period. Now, the reason you should think for yourself is because you want happiness. Now, if you don't want happiness, go jump off a bridge. We don't have anything to say to people that choose to destroy themselves. But if you do choose to live and you do choose happiness as your goal, rationality is the way you're going to get there. It is not a list of moral injunctions that you have to do this and you have to do that. It's simply admitting the nature of human beings.
What you may consider to be in your best interest and best self-interest and consider it rational, someone else might object to.
Hey, let me.
Now, why is that a defeat of Ayn Rand's ethics? Because two people could disagree on what makes what. Now, what would they disagree on? On what makes one person happy? If I and Matt are disagreeing on what makes Matt happy, then Matt wins that. He knows what makes himself happy. Now, if I'm correct and Matt's mistaken, and Matt goes on and does his thing, then he will be unhappy, even though he thinks that his actions are going to make him happy, and I will be proven right, and I will be sitting over here crowing and being proven right. That can happen too. But he just thinks because there can be some sort of a disagreement between people about what would lead to one's happiness, therefore, Ayn Rand's whole system of assertions, he reviews it all as assertions, we can just throw it all out because two people could disagree. So if we can throw out Rand's ethics. Okay, that's the depth at which he's able to understand this.
Throw out an example. What if a guy wants to sacrifice himself for somebody else? Well, who the hell is Ayn Rand to tell him that he can't do that?
Well, I mean,
he can do that.
It would be a free expression of her opinion that he is acting. He's not acting consistently with her moral values.
But he's not acting consistently with his own nature. Now, if he really did sacrifice himself for somebody else, that means he gives himself up for someone who's worth less than him. That's what the word sacrifice would mean. You don't give yourself up for something greater than you. That wouldn't be a sacrifice. That would be a trade. Right? If you say if you give up your entire life and your life ends and you die, that's a sacrifice no matter how you did it. Okay, maybe then you could say you sacrificed yourself to the greater good or something like that. Like in a war or something. But the point that objectivists would make then is that you didn't want to live in the world that existed. You were fighting against it in some way. So even there, these guys are wrong. It is true that your own rational self-interest is the purpose of a moral life. So even a man who chose to sacrifice himself, which means give up his life for something less valuable than his life, he would be wrong in doing so. And objectivism would just shrug. Right? We would just shrug and say, well, he did not lead to his greatest happiness. There's nothing you can do about these people. Lots of people jump off bridges.
But we haven't gotten to a point where we can say, oh yes, I agree that you're correct on this.
Yeah, well, I'll get back to this, but then we get to something else, and before I get to point number 4, let me make a pledge. I disagree. Ayn Rand is in a lot of ways the intellectual forebear of a lot of today's libertarianism. And I think for people who've listened to this show and the nonprofits before, it's no big secret that I'm not really into libertarianism. But my pledge today is I'm going to try not to too much get into a critical thing about libertarianism, because I really want to focus on Ayn Rand's weird definition of what objectivity is, and then get into some of the strange cult-like practices that seem to spring up around them.
Oh, that wouldn't be a big surprise if they ended up using the scandals, sexual scandals and stuff as part of their critique of objectivism. Why would that not surprise me? All right, let's go to number 2 then.
If you agree that climate change is...
Tom Steyer, 2020. There we go. Don't vote for Tom Steyer. We know that much. This is that band. We're hearing a band called Rush, which is supposedly objectivism rock music. And I've tried several times on you people have recommended them to me over and over. I just cannot understand. I just dislike noise.
Okay, let's see, back to objectivism. I just want to drive this point home one more time, that Leonard Peikoff, who is kind of a disciple of Ayn Rand, and is responsible for a whole lot of the material that's been published about objectivism, mentions what is meant by objective reality. He says, people often speak of objective reality. In this usage, which is harmless, objective means independent of consciousness. The actual purpose of the concept, however, is to be found not in metaphysics, but in epistemology. Strictly speaking, existents are not objective, they simply are. It is minds, and specifically conceptual processes, that are objective or non-objective. That seems...
There's the law of identity for you, ladies and gentlemen. Things simply are. They simply are.
It's ass backwards to me. What he's saying is, and this is in his book titled Objectivism, is that reality isn't... I mean, you know, the external world isn't necessarily objective, but minds are.
Yeah. And this guy believes the external world is objective, but minds aren't necessarily. Now, Peikoff hasn't said that all minds are always objective, has he? He's said that the term objectivism applies to our mental processes. That's all the claim he's making. This guy doesn't even understand that. But it's the case that if humans failed to exist, the world would go on existing and planets and stuff would go on existing. They simply exist. Objectivity means to have a state of affairs inside your brain which matches the state of affairs in reality. That is objectivity. Now, he doesn't understand that because he believes that ideas are divorced from humans in a floating, separate reality. Real ideas. There's junk, crappy ideas that are connected to reality. But really good, important ideas are floating and detached from reality. Like, remember earlier, he had the axioms right in front of him, and he says these are just assertions. Right? So even a fact that you can't deny is an assertion to him. Nothing is connected to reality for him. Ideas particularly have nothing to do with reality. So objectivity is somewhere outside of human beings. And the terrible thing about human beings is that they are so subjective. In his mind, in his philosophy. So, when Peikoff comes and says something perfectly plain and simple, like objects simply exist, and objectivity itself is a concept that applies only to our minds and a state of things in our minds, this guy, it just blows his hippie noodle, doesn't it? Hippie noodle blown.
And that makes no sense.
Well, I think he's using language. I agree that it doesn't make any sense, the second part.
Yeah.
But when he says, strictly speaking, existents are not objective, I think he's saying, now we're getting back to word usage, I think he's saying that they're not objective in the sense that they're talking about. When he says they simply are, then, you know, that goes back to the A is A thing.
Yeah, right.
So that guy sees what's going on. He's not so worried about it. So kudos, Matt, for seeing through that and not getting so upset about it. But he did deride the second part of it, which is bad.
Which we would agree with. A is definitely A.
A certainly is A. I have no complaint about that.
A is.
But it's just an assertion, right?
Not A-OK. It's just A.
So, I mean, to go with a theme here, one of my central objectives, one of my central objections to objectivism is the treatment of, is the sort of declaration that everything should be objective. That not only is the physical world objective, but there are values which everybody must have, and there are no real subjective values. If there are, then it's basically the result of bad thinking that's not...
Alright, this is just a bizarre straw man he's building here out of his own misconceptions. This is just a bizarre straw man. He's building a bizarre, weak thing.
The treatment of... is the sort of declaration that everything should be objective.
So objectivists declare that everything should be objective? Or do we declare that if you want to be happy in your life, you should try to be objective?
That not only is the physical world objective, but there are values which everybody must have.
Really? Does objectivism say everybody must have these values? Or does objectivism say if you choose happiness as your value, then you must use rationality to obtain it because that is your nature? Which one does objectivism say?
And there are no real subjective values.
Are there subjective values? Is there something I value as Mr. Cropper that a lot of you might not value even though you're objectivists? Even though you live in a modern industrial society and you're educated and you're watching YouTube and you're interested in the same things as me, and yet I will have values that you don't? Is that possible? That he is just so confused.
Values which everybody must have, and there.
Now, is it the values everybody must have being rationality and happiness? Those are so broad as to not, you can't say that some people don't have this value. It is the default value of all human action. So if he's upset about happiness as a value everyone has to have. Now, happiness is what you would pursue. Your value would be something like, my values are intellectual studies, recently it's been painting, education, primary and adult education. So those would be objective values for me to pursue my happiness. They're not necessarily a good value for everybody. If you're a farmer in South Africa and you're an objectivist, you're not necessarily going to spend a lot of time reading books. You probably have other more important things to do. Mr. Cropper has time to read books from time to time. So your values are what you choose in order to get happiness, which is just acting in accordance with your nature. So if he's upset as happiness as a value, I would just say it's not a value. It is the ultimate, final value to which all your values point, which all your values serve. It is the only end in itself. All of your values are a means towards an end. Your end goal is happiness. Now, maybe if I could say these words to him, but I doubt it. I doubt it would help, because he read the axioms and then he called them assertions. So he is just plain dead wrong philosophically, and there's just no way for him to figure out what's going on here.
There are no real subjective values. If there are, then it's basically the result of bad thinking that's not in line with objectivism.
See, that is just his total misunderstanding. I could value, one of my values could be pets, and maybe you as an objectivist don't value them. And so according to him, somebody in this situation is wrong, because all objectivists would have to value pets. So it's just bizarre. Are there or are there not individual values to serve happiness in individual lives? Yes. Are there values to serve happiness in individual lives which are not objective? What do you mean? You mean objective in some floating sense, divorced from reality? No, there's nothing like that. Nothing is divorced from reality. Nothing floats.
Okay, so I'm going to get a little bit into Ayn Rand's books. Anthem is not one of her more famous books. The most famous ones are The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. The Fountainhead is about a brilliant architect named Howard Rourke. This is going to be the super duper compressed summary of the book. Howard Rourke is a genius who is unrecognized by all these people, except for the very, very small...
You know, was he a genius or was he just an honest architect? I don't know if he was a genius, because I have so much in common with him, he has so much in common with me. I think it's a personality type that Ayn Rand patterned him after. Not that everybody has the same personality type who is an objectivist, But his indifference, his cold indifference to other people and stuff like that. This is not cold indifference, as Mike said when they were having a beer. He said, "Howard, you're the most religious man I know." And I myself am not coldly indifferent to people. I am more concerned with people than the people around me who profess to be concerned with people. So, let's see. I don't know exactly where I got off on this. But, okay, Howard Rourke. Yeah. He is not a perfect genius. He's just an honest architect. He's just honest. Now, we could have a society that would be filled with Howard Rourkes. What would that look like? Well, we did have that once upon a time, and they were called the Founding Fathers. And you could get a bunch of them in a room, and you would not have one great man there. You'd have a dozen or more, right? People who have come down to us through the ages, their writings and their thought are still very important. Society was full of those people at the time. A small society of 3 million people on the coast of North America put together a group of geniuses unparalleled in history, since ancient Greece, perhaps. So, I don't think Howard Rourke is a genius. I think Howard Rourke is an honest architect, and I think that society would be full of them in a better culture.
Small number of really smart people in the world. He has this sort of guy who leeches off of his brilliance named Peter Keating, who he helps out occasionally by designing something, and then Peter Keating weasels and takes the credit for it.
Wait, does he get popular and put out an album that people then call too commercial?
What?
He's sold out? Oh, never mind. Sorry.
Who, Peter Keating or Howard Rourke, the brilliant
Rourke, the unrecognized genius.
Howard Rourke stays true to his ideals right through the end, where he delivers this long speech in front of a courtroom where he's accused of blowing up one of his own buildings to make a statement. And they just let him talk, which is kind of a theme in Ayn Rand, that at the end, the brilliant noble hero has to be able to talk for a long time uninterrupted and serve as a mouthpiece for the author. Meanwhile, there's this interesting villain in Ayn Rand's
Now, is that a criticism?
book named...
I can't even object to it. I mean, as a mouthpiece for the author. Hoi polloi, I just don't know what to say about it. I mean, yeah, if you don't like The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged as reading, just read her nonfiction. Try that out. I myself was slightly embarrassed reading Atlas Shrugged after reading The Fountainhead, which I think The Fountainhead's written better. But they're both great books. Sometimes I give my opinion of Atlas Shrugged as being not quite as well written or something. And Objectivists jump down my throat. So I'm not real strong about my view on it. Certainly, Atlas Shrugged is a far, far, far better book than virtually anything else you could read at all. Even Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky, as good as Dostoevsky is, that is not even 10% the book that Atlas Shrugged is, even as an artistic project. So Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead, even if you say that they have the characters have long speeches in them, I think they are fabulous. You ladies and gentlemen can judge for yourself. That's all I can say in defense of it. It's really a matter of opinion, isn't it?
And Ellsworth Toohey, who kind of exemplifies everything that's wrong in the Ayn Rand universe, which is, well, earlier I mentioned that one of her
Now, I have to be fair here. We've left objectivism, so if you've come here for my objecting to their objections to objectivism, I think that's over. Now he's criticizing her literature.
fundamental principles is that man must not sacrifice himself to other people. In fact, if I can skip ahead to Atlas Shrugged for just a second, one of the characters in Atlas Shrugged swears the following oath: "I swear by my life and my love of it that I will never live for the sake of another human being or ask another human being to live for mine." In fact, she even has a cute little name which pops up repeatedly in her work. She calls those people second-handers. This is a very bad insult if you're talking to a Rand person. I really want to get through the fiction section of this, so I'm going to get to the book I brought in substitute of the Bible today, Atlas Shrugged. And Atlas Shrugged, I'm also going to do a super compressed summary of. Basically,
Good, because that's a long-ass book.
It is a long book. By the way, Atlas Shrugged is now being made into a movie with Angelina Jolie in the starring role as Dagny Taggart. Okay, so I'm sorry, but if you haven't read this book when it's been out for like 60 years, too bad you're getting spoilers. It's, as one site put it, about 10 minutes in the future of when Ayn Rand was writing. So it's sort of a bleak near future world where the world is completely run by stupid people. I mean, that's pretty much the way to sum it up. There are
Basically, the Democrats have taken control in Atlas Shrugged. The Democrats, the leftists, and the socialists.
a very small number of brilliant, noble people left in the world, one of them being Angelina Jolie, who is also hot. But then we've also got...
And an atheist.
Oh, yeah, right. Then we've got this mysterious figure known as John Galt, who's spoken as sort of a catchphrase throughout the book. And we've got some other people like Hank Rearden. They're all brilliant inventors and businessmen and people who get shit done. Oh, excuse me.
Are they brilliant or are they honest? Especially Hank Rearden, right? Who had to evolve throughout the book, and his views evolved, and he did things that we might say, why did you do that? And in a better, bigger context, he might have done something slightly differently at the beginning of the book, but he couldn't. He was his character. But a man of integrity, a man of honesty and integrity. So I just don't take this view that everybody takes, that these people are some sort of genius moral giants. They seem like good people to me. They seem like me. They seem similar to, I see my character traits in them. Now that's obviously, let's not read too much into that. I'm an objectivist, so it shouldn't be a surprise that I have the same views as the characters in Ayn Rand's philosophy who are exemplifying her philosophy. Yeah, I don't know what
I guess
to say.
we can say that now, but okay. They're the kind of people who get stuff done, and there's all these second-handers in the book who want to leech off their ideas and get the benefit of them without working. And then what happens is, here's the spoilers, John Galt runs away from society and basically takes all his cool toys with him, founds this
Wrong. Isn't that wrong? For example, Dagny and Rearden went on that vacation together, and they went and found that old factory, and they found an old copy of the motor. And so John Galt left that factory, and he left all his stuff behind. It's not true that he took all his cool toys with him, and that's the point of the story. The power of John Galt is in his mind, not in the machine he built. He left the machine with them, right? Dagny didn't take all the trains. She didn't need to. Hank Rearden didn't take his steel mills, right? Wyatt didn't take all his oil wells. He blew one of them up, but it didn't matter. He didn't need to. They weren't going to continue producing it without him. That is the whole point of the story, which this guy misses right here. John Galt left and took all his cool toys. No, he didn't. The point of the story is that he left the toys behind.
hidden society in the middle of nowhere, and then starts convincing all the geniuses in the world to run away with him and go basically do what I said before, which is create an experimental version of a libertarian utopia. All the smart people in the world run away, and they make their own little society, and the world gets to be in worse and worse shape, but that's okay because they all deserve it, because the vast, vast, vast majority of the world are stupid.
But his promotion of oligarchical ideas where the intelligent are the ones who rule, or separatist societies where we've taken all the geniuses off. Having not read Atlas Shrugged, and I have no idea how John Galt's little experiment worked out.
Oh, of course.
I'm wondering.
He took over the world.
I'm wondering who was doing the cooking and cleaning and the manufacturing.
Now, you guys remember in Galt's Gulch, Kate was a waitress, right?
Policing. Who was doing the daily things that these geniuses and superheroes probably weren't doing?
And who was mining the coal? What's his name had a coal mine and he was getting 2 or 3 loads of ore out a day or whatever. Remember that? And Hank said, back in the real world you could be, have hundreds of tons of coal per day. And he would say, yeah, but it'd all be going to those leeches. So, who was doing all the little dirty work? The whole point that Ayn Rand made was these moral giants compared to the pygmies around them, these good, honest people, the last honest people on earth, all withdrew to start over again at the base and do very basic, very mundane work. As a mechanic for the other people in town, one of the guys was a mechanic, right? He was a brilliant engineer in the outside world. Here he's just a local mechanic. Kate was a world-famous model, or whatever she was. She was really beautiful. Why was she? I can't remember her character, but in Galt's Gulch, she was a waitress. So, yeah, fail. Matt Dillahunty, fail. Russell Glasser, fail. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cropper has been with you. If you enjoyed this stuff, please patronize me. $5 or $10 a month would help. My goal is around 500 to 600 so that I can make this a regular thing and spend a lot of time doing it and not feel bad or guilty about it. So please, if you value what I'm doing, if you want me to do more of it, pile on the Patreon and help me get a stream built up so that I can do this reliably.